The train was crowded that evening, just like every other weekday. People stood shoulder to shoulder, clutching the poles, swaying with the rhythm of the moving train. The air was thick with the mix of perfumes, food smells, and the faint scent of metal. Some people looked tired after a long day at work, their eyes half closed. Others scrolled on their phones, earphones in, completely cut off from the world around them. In one corner seat sat a woman who looked calm, almost as if the noisy environment could not touch her. She had a small book in her hands, and though the train jolted now and then, she turned each page carefully. She dressed in a very simple way. Her clothes were neat but not expensive looking, and her hair was tied back in a simple style. She did not wear heavy jewelry or anything flashy. She looked like any ordinary passenger who just wanted to reach home in peace. Her face carried a quiet grace, and though she was clearly tired, there was something steady about her presence. It was the kind of calm that stands out in a place full of restless energy. On the other side of the train sat a man whose voice was louder than the train's wheels. He was not alone, two of his friends were with him. They laughed at every small thing he said, but most of the other passengers kept their eyes down. This man enjoyed the attention, even if it came with disapproval. He leaned back in his seat, spreading his arms wide as if the whole train belonged to him. He wore clothes that tried to make a statement: bright sneakers, a jacket with large letters, and a chain around his neck that clinked when he moved. He did not blend into the background, he wanted to be noticed. At first, he joked with his friends loudly, but soon he got bored. His eyes wandered across the carriage, searching for someone new to target. That's when he noticed the quiet woman with her book. She had not once looked in his direction, and that made him uneasy. Most people at least threw him a nervous glance, but she seemed to act as if he didn't exist. For someone like him, who thrived on controlling attention, this silence felt like a challenge. He leaned forward a little and whispered something to his friends. They chuckled. Then he raised his voice, speaking just loud enough for the woman to hear. "Hey, what you reading there? Must be something boring. Who even reads books anymore?" His friends laughed louder. The woman didn't look up. She simply turned another page, her expression calm and unchanged. The man's smile faded slightly. He had expected her to flinch, to at least acknowledge him. But she gave him nothing. He tried again. "You too good to answer? Sitting there like some queen on a throne? Come on, talk." His voice carried through the carriage, making several passengers uncomfortable. A young man near the door shook his head but quickly looked away when the bully's eyes scanned the crowd. Nobody wanted to get involved. The train rattled on, but inside the carriage, the tension grew heavier. The bully's friends watched closely, half excited, half nervous. They liked the drama but didn't want it to go too far. The woman kept her calm. She gently placed a bookmark inside the book and closed it. Slowly, she lifted her eyes toward the man. Her look was steady, not fearful, not angry, just calm, almost as if she was observing a small child misbehaving. Her eyes unsettled him for a moment, but he quickly shook it off. "What's that look for?" he asked loudly. "Think you're better than me? Think you can just ignore me like I'm invisible?" His voice was sharp now. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pulling out their phones, pretending to scroll but really recording. Everyone could feel this was building towards something. The woman finally spoke. Her voice was soft but clear. "Please let me read in peace," she said. "I don't want any trouble." Her politeness only fueled his irritation. He leaned forward even more, pointing at her with exaggerated gestures. "Oh, she doesn't want trouble. Guess what, lady, trouble doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up." His friends laughed again, though their laughter sounded more forced now. The atmosphere was heavy, and people's eyes flickered between the man and the woman nervously. The woman didn't reply this time. She reopened her book and looked back down at the page, returning to her world of quiet. That small act of ignoring him was like fire to his pride. He couldn't stand being treated like air. His entire identity rested on being noticed, feared, or respected, and here was someone who gave him none of that. His face turned red with frustration. He started muttering louder, calling her rude for not giving him the respect he thought he deserved. These types think they're better than everyone. Sitting there like she's too smart, too perfect. He kicked the base of the seat near her feet, making a loud noise that startled a few passengers. She didn't react. Not even a flinch. The train stopped at another station, and more passengers came in. The carriage grew tighter, but no one dared sit near the tension. People gave them space, choosing to stand rather than get caught between the two. An old man glanced at the bully with disapproval but quickly looked away when the bully noticed. The woman's quiet nature created a mirror that showed the man exactly what he was: loud, insecure, and desperate for power. But instead of realizing it, he grew angrier at her calmness. He didn't realize that everyone around him was no longer laughing with him but watching him with quiet judgment. The woman turned another page, her face as calm as before. For her, silence was strength. For him, silence was unbearable. His friends exchanged nervous looks now. They could see his temper building, and they were no longer sure they wanted to be part of this scene. And so, the train kept moving forward, every sound of its wheels echoing the building tension inside. The woman sat steady with her book, and the bully leaned forward, restless, irritated, and ready to do something reckless. The passengers could sense it. No one knew what exactly was about to happen, but everyone could feel that the quiet of the woman and the noise of the bully were heading for a collision that could not be avoided. The train rocked forward, carrying the sound of metal against tracks, but inside the carriage, silence grew heavier. People could feel the atmosphere shifting, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. The woman sat with her book, calm and collected, her hands steady. She had spoken once, asking politely for peace, but she had gone back to her quiet world. To many passengers, that small act of strength felt bigger than any loud words. But to the bully, her silence was the spark that made his anger rise higher. He leaned forward until his shadow covered her book. His face came closer, his voice sharper. "I said talk to me," he barked. His words echoed in the train, bouncing off the walls. A baby somewhere down the carriage began to cry, startled by the sudden loudness. The baby's mother pulled the child close, shushing gently, casting nervous glances toward the bully. Still, the woman remained calm. She raised her eyes slowly and said, "Please step aside. You are making people uncomfortable." Her voice was not harsh, not fearful, but it carried weight. It was the kind of voice that could settle an argument without needing to shout. But the bully, who thrived on control, saw it as a challenge. "You think you can tell me what to do," he said, his lips curling into a grin that didn't match the storm in his eyes. His friends tried to laugh, but the sound was weak. They knew the attention of the whole carriage was now focused on this moment. No one dared intervene, but everyone watched. The woman placed her book gently into her bag and folded her hands in her lap. She sat upright, showing no fear, no hesitation. She looked at him as if he were a stranger passing by on the street, unworthy of more than a glance. That look pierced his pride. He felt small, and his only answer to that feeling was to grow louder. "You think you're too good for me, huh?" he shouted, drawing more eyes. "Sitting there acting like I don't matter. You think this train belongs to you?" A young man near the doors whispered under his breath, "Leave her alone." But when the bully spun around to catch who said it, no one looked up. Everyone's heads were bent low, their eyes on the floor, pretending not to have seen. The train kept moving, its engine humming, but inside, the silence between each word felt sharper than the metal rails. The woman's calmness acted like a mirror. The more peaceful she looked, the more restless he became. He needed control, and without it, he felt the walls of the train closing in. Then, without warning, his anger exploded. He lifted his hand and struck her across the face. The sound was not loud, but it echoed louder than the wheels beneath the train. The entire carriage froze. A woman gasped, her hand covering her mouth. The baby cried louder. An old man lowered his head, his eyes filled with sadness at the world's silence. Phones that had been hiding before were now openly recording, the passengers too shocked to stay invisible. The woman did not cry out. She did not flinch back in fear. Her face turned slightly from the impact, but she straightened again slowly, her eyes steady. She looked at him in silence, her calmness stronger than before. That silence was heavier than any scream could have been. The bully expected her to cry, to beg, or to shrink into herself. Instead, her steady gaze made him feel exposed. For a moment, he shifted his weight, uncomfortable under her eyes. His friends looked at one another, suddenly unsure if they wanted to laugh anymore. A little boy near the corner whispered to his mother, "Why is nobody helping?" His innocent voice carried through the carriage, cutting into the heavy silence. The mother pulled him close, her face tight with fear. People wanted to help, but fear chained their legs. Everyone had the same thought, what if he turned on them next? The bully smirked again, forcing confidence back into his voice. "See what happens when you ignore me," he said loudly, trying to convince himself as much as the others. "You thought staying quiet would save you. Think again." The woman gently touched her cheek, not out of pain but as if acknowledging what had just happened. Then she sat upright once more, her expression unchanged. Her silence was not weakness. It was power. And though the bully tried to act as if he had won, deep inside he felt something shift. The other passengers looked between the two, unsure what would happen next. Some whispered, some shook their heads, but no one moved. The weight of fear still pressed on their shoulders. Yet, at the same time, they could not stop staring at her calmness. It was as though she knew something none of them did, as though this moment was not the end but only the beginning. The bully leaned back in his seat, puffing his chest out as if he had claimed victory. But his victory felt hollow. The woman's silence unsettled him. It was as if she was waiting, as if she held a secret he didn't understand. The passengers felt it too. They didn't know what was coming, but they could sense that this quiet woman had not yet revealed who she really was. The train carried on, metal wheels screeching as it entered a tunnel. The lights flickered, and in that brief moment of dimness, the bully felt a chill he couldn't explain. When the lights steadied again, she was still there, calm, steady, unshaken. And he, despite all his noise, was the one who looked restless now. The silence of the woman after the strike told a story louder than any voice could. It was the silence of someone who knew her worth, who didn't need to fight noise with noise. The bully thought he had won the moment, but in truth, the tide had begun to turn. The passengers didn't cheer, they didn't speak, but in their hearts, they had shifted. They no longer saw her as a victim. They saw her as someone holding strength in ways they couldn't yet understand. And the bully, though he didn't know it yet, had just started a chain of events that would change everything, events that would soon leave him shaken, exposed, and powerless in front of the very people who once feared him. The train continued to rattle along the tracks, but the atmosphere inside the carriage felt frozen. Every passenger had seen what happened, but most were too afraid to do anything. The woman, sitting calmly after being struck, kept her steady expression. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. Her eyes didn't carry fear, only quiet certainty. That was what unsettled the bully more than anything. He had expected tears, anger, or shouting, but instead he faced silence. And that silence carried weight. The bully leaned back in his seat, trying to act relaxed. He wanted to show the others he was in control, but deep down, a small unease had begun to grow in his chest. His friends were no longer laughing the way they had before. Their chuckles sounded nervous, their eyes darting between the woman and the other passengers. They knew the mood had changed. The woman reached calmly into her bag. The bully thought she might pull out a tissue or something to wipe her face, but instead, she took out her phone. She didn't rush. She didn't tremble. She unlocked it with ease, scrolling until she found a familiar number. Then, in front of the bully, in front of everyone, she pressed call. The phone rang only once before it connected. She lifted it to her ear, her voice soft but clear. "Honey," she said. The carriage fell silent. The word carried warmth, not fear. "I need you." The bully smirked at first, thinking she was calling some family member, maybe even the police. He wanted to show he wasn't scared. "Oh, calling for help? Go ahead," he said loudly. "See if anyone can save you now." But even as he mocked her, he couldn't help listening closely. On the phone, a deep, calm voice responded. "Where are you?" The woman answered with ease. "On the train. Someone just slapped me." She didn't raise her voice, didn't fill it with drama. She said it simply, like a fact. The bully froze. His smirk faded just slightly. Something in that voice on the other side of the call sounded strangely familiar. His ears perked up, trying to catch more. The other passengers were now leaning in, pretending not to listen but unable to resist. The voice on the phone grew sharper, protective. "What? Are you all right?" "I'm fine," the woman said gently. "But I thought you should know." She glanced once at the bully, her calm gaze steady. "He's right in front of me." That sentence made the bully's chest tighten. For the first time that evening, he felt something he hadn't felt all day, doubt. He shifted in his seat, his chain clinking against his jacket. His friend's eyes grew wide. One of them whispered, "Wait, that voice." The woman turned the phone slightly so that the speaker carried the sound through the carriage. The voice on the other end was unmistakable now. It was a voice passengers had heard in movies, trailers, interviews. Deep, steady, powerful. The voice of Vin Diesel. The passengers gasped softly. Some raised their phones higher, recording more eagerly now. The bully blinked, his mouth suddenly dry. He tried to laugh it off. "That's not, no way," he stammered, but his voice cracked slightly. He could feel his friends pulling back from him. "Tell me exactly where you are," the voice commanded firmly. The woman gave the train line and the stop they were approaching. "I'll be there," Vin Diesel's voice answered, strong and certain. The bully's stomach dropped. His bravado felt like a thin sheet of paper in the wind, ready to tear apart. Passengers who had been silent now exchanged looks of amazement. Some whispered, "Is that really Vin Diesel? Did she just call Vin Diesel?" The energy inside the carriage shifted completely. The bully leaned forward, trying to regain some control. "You expect me to believe that," he said, though his words sounded hollow. His earlier arrogance had begun to fade. He tried to laugh again, but nobody laughed with him this time. Not even his friends. The woman didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply ended the call and placed her phone on her lap. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. The bully felt sweat forming at his temples. Every passenger's eyes were now on him, not with fear, but with curiosity, judgment, and even a bit of pity. One of the passengers whispered, "If that really was Vin Diesel, this guy's in trouble." Another added, "He doesn't know what he's gotten himself into." The bully shifted again. His earlier comfort had evaporated. He tugged at his jacket collar, glanced around at the recording phones, and felt the weight of every eye on him. His friend slowly slid away, no longer wanting to sit so close. The woman, however, remained in her seat, her face calm as ever, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. For the first time, the bully realized he was no longer in control. The room he once commanded with noise was now commanded by silence, and that silence belonged to her. His pride had pushed him too far, and now he was trapped in the consequences. The train announced its next stop. The sound of the speaker made the bully flinch. He tried to think quickly, tried to imagine leaving at the next station, but the thought of cameras, of recordings, of what might wait outside, made his chest tighten. He muttered to himself, "This can't be real. No way." But deep down, he knew it was real. The calmness of the woman told him it was. She had no need to shout, no need to prove herself. Her silence carried truth, and that truth was heavier than any denial he could muster. Passengers who once looked away now looked directly at him. A young woman shook her head with disappointment. A father held his son closer, whispering something about respect. An older woman whispered, "This is what happens when arrogance meets the wrong person." The bully slumped slightly, his energy drained. He tried to sit tall, but it was useless. The woman had said only a few words, yet those words had shifted the entire train. She had not shouted. She had not fought back. She had only made one phone call, and with that, the entire game had changed. The train rattled on, but the bully sat quietly now, his chest tight, his pride wounded. The woman's silence was stronger than his noise, and the truth of who she was, or rather, who she was connected to, had just turned the tide completely against him. And though he tried to hide it, deep inside, he was terrified of what was about to happen when the train stopped. The train rolled forward, but the bully no longer carried the same confidence he had only moments ago. His smirk had faded, replaced by restless glances toward the doors, toward the passengers, and finally back at the woman who sat calmly, her phone resting quietly in her lap. She hadn't spoken another word since the call, and that silence carried more power than anything she could have said. It was as if she knew that everything was already in motion, and nothing he did could change the outcome. The other passengers began whispering softly among themselves. Some leaned close to one another, murmuring about what they had just witnessed. "That was really Vin Diesel's voice," one man whispered. "I've heard him in interviews." "That was him." Another replied, "If she's really his wife, this guy is finished." The bully heard those words, and they hit him harder than he expected. His earlier pride was shrinking fast. He tried to puff out his chest again, forcing a laugh that sounded shaky. "You all believe that nonsense," he said, louder now, trying to take back control. "You think she's really married to some big Hollywood star? Come on, it's just a trick." But even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed him. He knew deep down it wasn't a trick. The certainty in her voice, the way she had spoken to the man on the phone, the reaction of the passengers, it all pointed to the truth. His friends avoided his eyes, shifting away slowly, no longer sitting proudly beside him. They didn't want to share in his downfall. The woman sat quietly, her hands folded neatly. She didn't need to respond. Her silence made the bully's words sound hollow, like echoes in an empty cave. And the more he tried to convince others, the more he convinced himself of his fear. The train slowed as it approached the next station. The electronic voice announced the stop, and passengers felt a ripple of anticipation. Whispers spread like a wave. "What if security's waiting?" one woman asked softly. "He's in trouble," another replied. Phones were out everywhere now, cameras pointed, ready to capture what would happen when the doors opened. The bully's hands grew sweaty. His chain clinked as he fidgeted nervously. He imagined stepping off the train and finding people waiting. He thought about how quickly news spreads, how fast a single video could go viral. His face, his actions, everything could be shared with millions within hours. He had always wanted attention, but not like this. He leaned forward toward the woman. "Hey, "Listen," he said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "We don't need to make this a big deal. It was just a mistake. Okay? Just forget about it?" The woman did not reply. She simply looked at him with the same calm eyes. That calmness cut deeper than anger ever could. Her silence told him that his time for apologies had passed. The situation was no longer in his hands. The train pulled into the station with a squeal of brakes. The doors slid open, and on the platform stood two uniformed security officers. Their expressions were serious as they scanned the carriage. Passengers stepped aside quickly, giving them a clear view. Whispers rose into a hum of excitement. Phones recorded every second. The bully's chest tightened. His earlier boldness crumbled entirely. He wanted to shrink into his seat, to become invisible, but it was too late. The officers stepped into the train, their eyes locking on him almost instantly. One pointed. "You. Step out." The bully tried to laugh nervously. "What? Me? You've got the wrong person." But even his voice betrayed his fear. His words cracked. His friends had already moved away from him, their loyalty gone the moment trouble arrived. The woman stayed seated, calm as ever. She didn't raise her hand, didn't accuse, didn't speak. She simply sat, her silence more powerful than 1,000 words. The officers didn't need her to explain. They could see it in the eyes of every passenger, in the way cameras were pointed at him, in the atmosphere that weighed heavy around them. The bully stood reluctantly, his legs shaky. The officers guided him toward the doors. Passengers shifted further back, some with relief, others with satisfaction. His earlier arrogance had turned into a walk of shame. The same man who had filled the carriage with noise now looked small and weak. As he stepped onto the platform, the crowd inside the train began to murmur louder. "That's what he gets. He picked the wrong person. He had no idea who she was." Some even clapped softly, not for his humiliation, but for the strength of the woman who had faced him with calmness. The bully glanced back once before the doors closed. His eyes met the woman's, and in that moment, he understood the full weight of what had happened. He hadn't just bothered a random passenger. He had crossed someone far beyond his imagination. The image of her speaking calmly on the phone, the deep protective voice on the other end, it would haunt him. Inside the train, passengers began to relax. The heavy tension had lifted, replaced by a buzz of excitement. People whispered about what might happen next. "Do you think Vin Diesel will really come?" someone asked. "What if he's already on his way?" another replied. The woman sat quietly, still composed, still graceful. She didn't need to explain herself. She didn't need to correct the whispers. She simply sat there, knowing the truth would soon reveal itself on its own. Her calmness made passengers respect her even more. The train rolled forward again, leaving the bully behind on the platform with security. Passengers leaned closer to one another, sharing theories, watching the woman with admiration. She had turned an entire situation around without raising her voice, without creating chaos. Her strength was quiet, but it was unshakable. The bully, meanwhile, stood outside with the officers. His friends had slipped away, pretending they didn't know him. The platform seemed colder than the train. He felt the weight of the phone still pointed at him from the windows as the train moved away. His chest was heavy with regret, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Back inside the carriage, the woman finally lifted her phone again. She typed a short message, her expression soft but steady. She didn't announce what she wrote, but those closest could see the screen light up. Her fingers moved calmly across the keys, as if everything was under control. The passengers sat in awe. They had expected anger, shouting, maybe even tears. Instead, they saw calmness, patience, and strength. And in that moment, they realized they had witnessed something rare. It wasn't just about who she was married to, it was about who she was herself. The train kept moving, but everyone knew the story wasn't finished yet. Something greater was waiting at the next stop, something that would make the bully's mistake echo even louder. And though the woman sat quietly, her presence filled the entire carriage with a sense of power that no one could deny. The train sped forward, carrying passengers who were still buzzing from what they had witnessed. People whispered in low voices, some replaying the recordings on their phones, others shaking their heads at the sheer twist of events. The woman who sat calmly in her corner had suddenly become the center of everyone's attention. She had not shouted, not begged, not raised her voice even once, yet she had turned the entire atmosphere upside down with only a phone call. The bully was gone, taken off at the last stop with security, but the story was far from over. The passengers could feel it in the air. Something bigger was about to happen. They glanced at the woman now and then, their faces showing a mix of admiration and curiosity. Who exactly was she? She looked so ordinary, yet she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing to prove. The train slowed as it neared the next major station. A ripple of excitement spread through the carriage. People straightened in their seats, phones ready again, eyes wide with anticipation. Everyone had the same thought: what if Vin Diesel was really waiting at this station? The possibility alone was enough to send a buzz of energy rushing through the passengers. The woman remained calm. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, glanced once at her phone, then looked ahead as if nothing unusual was happening. But her silence, her serenity, only made the anticipation greater. The train pulled into the station with a long screech, and the doors slid open. For a moment, there was only the usual noise of passengers stepping out and others stepping in. Then, as if time slowed, heads began to turn toward the platform. Standing there, unmistakable, was Vin Diesel himself. The sight made the carriage erupt in whispers, gasps, and the frantic clicking of cameras. He stood tall, his presence commanding even in the busy station. His head was slightly lowered, scanning the train with the sharp eyes of someone looking for one person only. Passengers nudged one another, some whispering, "It's really him. It's really Vin Diesel." When his eyes found her, his expression softened instantly. He stepped into the carriage with purpose, ignoring the phones, ignoring the whispers. He moved through the small crowd until he reached her. Without hesitation, he bent slightly and wrapped his arms around her in a protective embrace. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low but filled with care. The woman nodded gently. "I'm fine," she said softly. Her calmness remained, but now it was matched with the warmth of being beside him. The passengers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Some stared in awe, others covered their mouths, amazed. The entire scene felt like a movie playing out before their eyes. But this was no script. This was real life, unfolding in the middle of an ordinary train ride. Vin Diesel straightened, his protective arm still around her shoulders. He looked around at the passengers, his gaze sharp but calm. "Who was it?" he asked, his voice steady. Dozens of fingers pointed toward the doors where the bully had been taken away. Someone said, "Security took him at the last stop." Another added, "We all saw it. We recorded everything." Phones lifted into the air, showing proof. The bully's face, his arrogance, his actions all caught on video. Vin Diesel nodded firmly. "Good," he said. His voice carried both gratitude and certainty. "He will not get away with this." His tone made it clear that the matter would not be forgotten. The woman placed her hand gently on his arm, as if reminding him that everything was under control. He looked at her and gave a small nod, his anger softening at her calmness. The passengers watched, struck by the balance between them, her quiet strength and his protective presence. Together, they seemed unshakable. By now, the story had spread even further. Passengers were already posting online, sharing what they had witnessed. Within minutes, the videos began to circulate outside the train, and whispers turned into headlines. The world beyond the station was already learning what had happened. But inside the carriage, what mattered most was the moment. Passengers began speaking up, their courage finally returning now that the bully was gone and Vin Diesel was present. An older man said, "She was so strong. She didn't even flinch." A younger woman added, "She inspired us all. We were scared, but she showed us how to face him without fear." Vin Diesel listened carefully, his eyes softening with pride as he looked back at his wife. He could see what they meant. She had not needed to fight loudly, her strength was in her silence, in her calmness. That was what had shaken the bully most of all. The train began moving again, but no one could focus on the journey. The passengers kept stealing glances, whispering and smiling at the unexpected turn their ordinary evening had taken. Some still recorded discreetly, capturing every detail of the couple together. For them, this was more than a celebrity sighting. It was a story of justice, of quiet strength standing against arrogance, of love and protection shining in an ordinary place. As the train approached the next station, Vin Diesel gently guided his wife toward the doors. Passengers made space for them, some smiling, some even clapping softly. The sound of claps grew louder, spreading across the carriage. It wasn't for his fame, it was for her courage. The woman gave a small nod of gratitude to the passengers. She didn't say much, but her eyes carried warmth and strength. Then the doors opened, and together they stepped out onto the platform. Cameras flashed, voices whispered, but they moved calmly, side by side, unbothered by the noise. Behind them, passengers remained in the carriage, their hearts racing with the story they had just been part of. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled wide, and many knew they would go home that night with a story to tell their families. Not just about seeing a famous actor, but about seeing a lesson in courage and dignity. Far away, the bully sat with his head low in a small office with security. His bravado had drained completely, replaced with regret and fear. He knew the truth now, he had picked on the wrong woman. His arrogance had led him into a mistake that would follow him longer than he ever imagined. For the passengers, for the woman, for Vin Diesel, the night would be remembered differently. For them, it was proof that arrogance never lasts long, and that true strength often hides in silence. The train continued its journey, but the story it carried would not stay inside its walls. It would spread, inspire, and remind people everywhere that respect matters, that dignity is powerful, and that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest strength of all.